The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker was released for the Nintendo GameCube on December 13th, 2002 in Japan, March 24th, 2002 in North America, and May 2nd and May 7th, 2003 in Europe and Australia respectively. It was my first ever Zelda game, and it was subject to initial criticism by those who felt that its cel-shaded graphics were a significant and unnecessary tonal downgrade from the previous 3D Zelda titles, believing that the darker themes and tones of the older games had been cast aside in favor of a more Saturday morning cartoon feel. In the years that followed, people slowly began to warm up to this game's graphical design, and once they finally gave the game a fair shake, it widely became considered one of the greatest games ever made. I, on the other hand, have had my opinion sway in the opposite direction over the years. Whereas I previously defended the game, mostly because I was, at the time, such a hardcore Nintendo fanboy that I defended Nintendo on an almost instinctual level, I have since grown up and realized that my teenage and late adolescent self was an apologist. While I do not have any criticisms with the game's graphics, everything else about the game is just bad. Today, I wish to explain in detail why I feel this way. What's up guys, Acer Thorn here, and welcome to another video game discussion video. I do these analysis and discussion videos on a regular basis, so if you'd like to see more of them, hit that subscribe button to stay notified. Before we get started, I want to make a few things clear. First, spoiler warning. This video will spoil the main quest for this game. That should be obvious, but just in case you're a dumb shit, I'm spelling that out for you right now. Second, while I am aware that an HD remake was released for the Wii U, I personally have only ever played the GameCube version, and my review today will be limited exclusively to that version. Yes, I am aware that a good chunk of the complaints I will make today have reportedly been fixed by the Wii U version, but I don't care. I have since abandoned my fanhood of Zelda games. I now refuse to even purchase a new Zelda game after it has come out, because my experience with the Zelda franchise on the whole have been equally as disappointing as this game. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, and if I have been disappointed by a Zelda game 4 times in a row, it would be pretty pathetic of me to continue to expect a fun time from new Zelda games. So while I have heard that the Wii U remake has fixed some of the problems I will discuss in this video, though not all of them, I simply don't care enough to check out that version. So now that we've got the ground rules for this review out of the way, let's get started on the review proper. You begin the game by being treated to a supposedly epic slideshow which covers the events of Ocarina of Time. I say supposedly epic because, while it has some epic music playing in the background, they never really explain what exactly the main villain actually did. The prologue just uses these vague terms like evil and darkness and doom. In fact, this is a serious problem with the series as a whole. In all the Zelda games I've played and the numerous playthroughs of these games I've seen on YouTube, Ganon is one of the most vaguely defined villains in all of video games. Everyone talks about his climate of evil and how he plans to cast darkness and other ambiguous and abstract stuff onto the land, but we never really see him actually do anything. That's mostly because, with the exception of Ocarina of Time, most Zelda games are dedicated to actually preventing Ganon from conquering the world, rather than dethroning him. So we never really get the chance to see him actually flex his supposedly evil muscles. Even in Ocarina of Time, however, we still see very little actual, tangible damage done to the land, even when Ganon has had 7 whole years to do damage to it. There's a general feeling of hopelessness and despair, but no apparent cause of this feeling, let alone any actual damage to the world besides the purely emotional feelings of despair. Unless Ganon's quote-unquote evil magic just installs artificial depression into people, kind of like a Dementor in the Harry Potter franchise, then I don't see how Ganon is directly responsible for everyone's depression. Maybe it's because I wasn't having a whole lot of fun with these games, and therefore wasn't paying very much attention, but in every Zelda game I ever played, the only tangible thing I ever recall Ganon actually doing is in Ocarina of Time, when he took control of Lon Lon Ranch away from not Mario, and gave control over the ranch to not Luigi. But that's actually justifiable. Not Luigi broke his back keeping that ranch alive, and not Mario seemed content just sleeping all day, letting not Luigi do all the work while he gets all the profits from the ranch. So I'd say that not Luigi actually deserves to be rewarded for all his hard work. But anyway, back to the Wind Waker. The prologue of this game tries to portray Ganon as a pure evil character, but they don't really seem to be going out of their way to describe any actual atrocities that Ganon committed. Of course, this could actually be very interesting if the franchise actually took this moral ambiguity and ran with it. Imagine if there was ever a point in the series when we were forced to actually consider Ganon's point of view, or perhaps even question whether Ganon is actually the source of all evil in the world. Or maybe the accusations of evil were just made up by our own government. In Fallout 4, we have the option of joining the Institute if we feel that they are misunderstood by the people of the surface. Well, imagine if a similar opportunity were ever presented in a Zelda game where we had the opportunity to side with Ganon. It would really be an interesting moment. But the entire franchise, not just this game, isn't presenting this with any degree of self-awareness. Rather, it seems that Nintendo just really sucks at writing bad guys who actually do bad things. Nintendo appears to want us to simply accept that Ganon is evil, Link and Zelda are both good, and Ganon needs to be stopped because evil, and we're supposed to just roll with it like the good little drones we are. So anyway, when we actually began playing the game, it turns out to be Link's 18th birthday, and he grew up on a place called Outset Island. Gee, it sure is ironic that the outset of this game takes place on Outset Island, and that this is actually what the island is called in-universe. The only way the name could be more ironic is if it were called Tutorial Island in-universe. Anyway, after a few token heartwarming moments, you get the telescope and notice a giant bird with a woman in its talon getting chased by a pirate ship. The bird takes a cannonball to the head and drops the woman by at least 100 feet into the nearby woods. Despite there not being a snowball's chance in hell that she survived a fall from that height, your sister nevertheless demands that you go and rescue her. So you get your sword, do the sword tutorial, and head into the woods. Surprisingly, this woman survived the fall without a scratch on her despite all the odds, so we dispatch a few monsters before they can hurt her, and then one of her pirates shows up jumping around like he's got a rash between his legs and with his arms in the air like he just don't care. This girl, whose name is Tetra, seems shockingly ungrateful for us saving her ass. Bitch, see if I ever do you a favor ever again. And so we exit the woods. Despite her being the one who told us that the woods are dangerous, our sister decided to enter the woods herself completely unarmed. Gee, what could possibly go wrong here? Oh yeah, something like that. So our character believes that the best course of action is to literally walk off the edge of a cliff. Not the sharpest tool in the shed, this one. This is our hero of the story, ladies and gentlemen. What did he expect was gonna happen? This is supposed to be his 18th birthday. Surely he understands how gravity works by this point in his life. Maybe you could argue that because we occasionally see cartoon physics in this game, perhaps Link expected cartoon physics to apply. But even then, the no falling rule of cartoon physics only really applies for as long as the cartoon character doesn't realize that there's nothing beneath him, so it's not something that can be strategically exploited. When that goes about as well as you'd expect, Link comes up with a slightly less dim-witted plan. Hitch a ride with these pirates. The Rito postman convinces Tetra to take Link along on this journey because the bird thought that Arya was actually Tetra, even though they look absolutely nothing alike aside from having pointy ears. This is some pretty backward logic here, because if the bird was snatching up literally anyone it found who had both pointy ears and a vagina, then it's clear that Arya would have been snatched on sight anyway, even if the bird didn't think she was Tetra. I suppose Tetra agreeing to take Link along despite this shady logic is foreshadowing that Tetra is actually Princess Zelda with amnesia, and that she's actually a good person deep inside who has a great sense of responsibility and personal duty. But I would really like it if the game were actually a lot clearer about that. As it stands, much like the ambiguous evil that Ganon is supposed to be, the game seems completely unaware of how little sense the Rito Postman's logic makes, let alone whether this is any foreshadowing of any future plot points. Also, this is a minor nitpick, but when we use the telescope we're facing due west, yet the bird is flying from left to right, meaning that the bird is flying due south. However, the Forsaken Fortress, which is where the bird was supposedly taking Tetra, is northwest of Outset Island. So, was the bird's plan to make a full lap around the planet to get to the Forsaken Fortress? So we head over to the Forsaken Fortress and we lose our sword, forcing us to use stealth to get around, as well as blunt weapons that happen to be lying around. I'll admit, this first dungeon of the game is the most fun I have playing the game, and if the rest of the game were this awesome, I wouldn't be making this video. If I had to make one complaint about this section, however, I would argue that the stealth mechanic in this game is wasted. Much like the sword tutorial on Outset Island, it seems that this dungeon is supposed to serve as a tutorial for the game's stealth system, yet this is the only time in the game when stealth is a necessary mechanic. Even on your second trip to the Forsaken Fortress, you'll have the sword from the get-go, so there's no need to stay out of the spotlight. So anyway, we attempt to rescue our sister, but the giant bird is watching us. So he takes us up to Ganon and he orders us to be thrown to the depths of the ocean. We're unconscious for a little while, but an unknown entity drifts up to us and rescues us. When we come to, we realize that it's actually a sentient talking boat called the King of Red Lions, or Coral for short, who says that he's been watching us and wants to help us in our mission to rescue our sister. But there's just one problem. He has no sail, and without a sail he can't go anywhere, so he has taken us to a place called Windfall Island to hopefully find a sail. Okay, wait a minute. If he can't go anywhere without a sail, then how did he manage to go all the way from the Forsaken Fortress over to Windfall Island? That's halfway across the game map. Ugh, fine. Let's do this pointless sail mission so we can get acquainted with Windfall Island. Now, Coral says that we don't have time to play around, and that we have to get a sail and make haste to acquire the items we need to defeat Ganon. However, there's a buttload of stuff to do on this island, including one thing other than getting a sail that we have to do in order to complete the game, although the game is in no way clear about this, but I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Later in the game, we return to Outset Island and Coral tells us that we can take as much time as we need while on this island, even though there's a fraction of stuff to do on the island at this point compared to our first visit to Windfall Island. Yes, I'm aware that there's an in-universe justification for this inconsistent dialogue, though I'll rip that in-universe justification a new one when I actually get to it, but that doesn't make it good game design. One major complaint I have about Windfall Island is that it's the only real town hub in the entire game. I get that it's the primary source of commerce amongst these islands, whatever this group of islands calls itself, but it's also the only place in the game where you can return to multiple times throughout the game and see new things happening. All other places of civilization, like Outset Island and the upcoming Dragon Roost Island, all feel rather static by comparison. It would have been a lot more immersive if Nintendo had spread out the side quests more evenly across the various hubs of civilization, rather than 90% of them being congregated at Windfall Island. So we eventually get a sail, and now we can depart for the Great Sea. I hate the Great Sea. It feels epic at first, sailing at top speed across the sea towards your destination, but that novelty wears off in about 2 minutes. After that novelty expires, we are forced to come to grips with the biggest flaw of the Great Sea.
It's empty!
I get that this is supposed to be realistic. If this really were an archipelago of islands, and we were traveling between them, then sailing between them probably would take up to almost as much time as we spend on the islands themselves. However, as realistic as that may be, that doesn't make it good game design. In the Elder Scrolls games, huffing it from one place to the next is half the fun. Finding new landmarks and new optional dungeons to explore, as well as random encounters we meet on the road, makes the overworld actually feel just as important as the dungeons and cities themselves. It's not as realistic as if the province of Cyrodiil or Skyrim were as big as an actual province, but as Daggerfall clearly demonstrates, it certainly is better for keeping you entertained the whole time, which I would argue is a much more important factor to a player's sense of immersion than strict realism alone. Now granted, Wind Waker does have places to visit on the overworld, but they are ridiculously spaced apart. You sail for 10 minutes and eventually come across some effing watchtower that you can climb up, kill a single monster, and grab a chest containing a red rupee. 10 minutes of sailing and 2 minutes of action. That's just not worth it. Much later in the game, we get the ability to have a sentient fish fill in our map for us, one tile at a time, so we can instantly see where all the goodies are located and not have to go zigzagging around to find them. By the time we eventually get to that ability, however, I've already lost all patience for this game's infernal overworld. I'd much rather just get this game over with and be done with it. Of course, the biggest sin that the Great Sea commits isn't even the emptiness itself. It's the fact that this sailing was the primary focus of this game's marketing. The King of Red Lions is on the game's box art, he's on the game's title screen, the sailing mechanic was all over this game's marketing. This is clearly something that Nintendo thought should be the focus of the game. Because of this, the primary gimmick of this game needs to be extra fun in order to live up to all the hype it's getting. Otherwise, the amount of hype surrounding it only serves to bring its own disappointing execution into even sharper focus than if it merely existed in the background. Now, as I understand it, the Wii U remake of this game actually added a swift sail, enabling you to sail around the sea a lot faster, heavily reducing the time spent where you do nothing but sail in a straight line without anything of interest happening. Personally, I find such an addition to be the epitome of laziness and cop-outs. Hey, here's a crazy idea. Instead of making the boring parts of this game over quicker, why not instead actually add content to the Great Sea? Aside from any percent speedrunners, I can't imagine anyone who would want a swift sail if you had to stop every 30 seconds anyway just to check out this little thing you just came across. Besides, exactly how long did it take you to code this swift sail and put it in the game? In Elder Scrolls and Fallout games, I can enter a single console command to make my character move a lot faster. While Zelda games do not allow the use of console commands, I have to imagine that simply making a sail that's functionally identical to the original sail and is just a bit faster is likewise a simple matter of changing just one value in the game's code. If this game had mod support, such an addition would be the kind of change I would expect from somebody making a mod for the first time in their lives as they're learning the most basic commands of the creation kit. giving us a swift sail so that the boring-ass sailing is just over quicker, is just lazy, it's a cop-out, and most importantly of all, it certainly isn't a substitute for actually putting content in the game. So anyway, after 10 whole minutes of sailing across the ocean with absolutely nothing happening, we finally reached Dragon Roost Island. We're supposed to get some pearl from the village chief. I don't know what it's called. They honestly all blur together to me. Even to this day, I still don't know what the difference is between a moblin, a boboblin, and a din. Maybe if I understood Japanese, these names would all mean something to me, but for my English-speaking self, it's all just word vomit. They renamed the monsters for the English world in the Mario franchise. Why can't they rename them in the Zelda franchise? So we go and see the village chief, and if you've ever played any video game ever, you know that it's not going to just be a simple matter of him handing the pearl over. Of course, you're going to have to complete a dungeon or some other quest before he hands the pearl over, because that's just how video games work. I don't have much of a problem with this formula. It may get contrived after a while, but without that formula, video game stories would be over way too quickly. No, my problem is that their in-universe reason for delaying the pearl transfer doesn't make any sense. So their master, a dragon named Valu, usually gives scales from his own body to Rito when they come of age, and this scale allows them to grow their wings so they can take to the skies. That's all fine and good, however, for reasons unknown, Valu has become volatile and unpredictable. We're tasked with entering Dragon Roost Cavern to see if we can find out what's wrong. At the halfway point of the dungeon, we eventually meet up with a Rito chick named Medley, who explains to us that the reason Valu is acting so weird is because some monster is torturing his tail. Okay, first of all, why doesn't Valu just tell his servants what's going on? Link doesn't understand Valu's language, but his Rito servants sure as hell do. So why doesn't Valu just tell them, something's hurting my tail? Communication, people! It makes life a lot easier and a lot more straightforward. Second, why doesn't Valu just pull his damn tail out of that damn volcano? If I'm sitting on the toilet and I feel something bite me on the ass, then I'm gonna get my ass off that commode. Even a preschooler can figure that out. Is it just because you like the way it feels with your tail in that hole? If so, then I got a few ideas of some other holes where you can stick it. So after that contrivance, we're taught how to use the Wind Waker to change the direction of the wind. We then head over to Forest Haven to get another interchangeable MacGuffin Pearl. Once again, the reason why you can't just give me the pearl immediately doesn't make any sense. All the Deku Tree says is that we need to wait for some ceremony to be completed. However, when we actually get to the ceremony, we realize that it only took a couple of minutes to complete. So, was the ceremony of such great importance that you couldn't put it off for even a minute to give me the damn pearl? Well, no, that can't be it, because when Makar enters the nearby forest dungeon, the ceremony is put off for several hours until he's safe back at Forest Haven. Despite such a long delay, the ceremony goes off without a hitch, so clearly you could have spared the 30 seconds it would have taken me to give me the stupid pearl. Also, minor side note. Supposedly, this ceremony is needed so that the saplings can all fly away and start spreading their seeds all over the islands of whatever the hell you call this country now that it's no longer called Hyrule. So, does that mean that Link just attended a puberty party? Rated A for everyone, ladies and gentlemen! So, next on our list of interchangeable MacGuffin Pearls is located at a place called Great Fish Isle. When we get there, however, we find that the place has already been ransacked. Coral realizes that this must be the work of Ganon. Wait a minute. Oh well, spank my ass and call me Latoya. You mean Ganon actually does something evil in this game, rather than just stand around being evil? Well, no, that can't be it, because when we confront Ganon later in the game, he reveals that he wanted us to pull the Master Sword from its pedestal, so why would he try to sabotage us like this? Besides, the curse that causes this land to be shrouded in perpetual darkness and rain is lifted after we break through Jabun's rock wall, meaning that this rock wall must have been the source of the curse, not Ganon's magic. As much as I doubt that Ganon would try to actively prevent us from freeing the Master Sword, I find it even harder to believe that he was the one who erected this wall to protect Jabun, or that Jabun would accept any protection erected by him. Furthermore, we eventually learn that the flooding the land in perpetual rainfall is actually the god's modus operandi, whereas we learn in the climax that Ganon wants Hyrule to be drenched in sunshine.
Everyone loves a sunshiny day, we're gonna keep it that way.
So yeah, all things considered, I really smell a rat with this whole ordeal. So until I see some direct evidence to the contrary, I'm going to assume that Great Fish Isle's fate was just the result of some really bad weather that Ganon had nothing to do with, but which the gods themselves may or may not have been party to, and Coral just instantly jumps to blaming Ganon for this problem because, you know, Ganon. He's that evil guy who's evil and stuff. So, a Rito postman shows up and tells us that Jabun, the whale god who has MacGuffin Pearl number 3, has fled this island and went into hiding at Outset Isle. But we need bombs in order to break through to where Jabun is. The only place where we can get bombs is at Windfall Island. So we go back to Windfall Island. The bomb shop is closed, so we instead have to find a way to sneak inside through a hole in the wall. When we get there, we see some familiar faces. The pirates who gave us a lift to the Forsaken Fortress are robbing the bomb merchant. They're apparently trying to also break into Jabun's MacGuffin Pearl. For what reason, I haven't the foggiest clue. I mean, the pearl is worthless without the other two also being placed in their respective statues. For that matter, why is Tetra so altruistic to Link all of a sudden? She initially insists that they head out to claim the pearl as quickly as possible over her crew's desire to eat at a restaurant. When we get the bombs, she acknowledges that she thought we were a goner when she saw the giant bird fling us into the farthest reaches of the ocean, so seeing us in the bomb shop was actually the first inkling she had since the Forsaken Fortress that we were still alive. So perhaps she then agrees to resume her favor of helping you save your sister by giving you an opportunity to get the pearl, which would in turn suggest that she actually understands what it's used for, which in turn begs the question of how she figured that out. She certainly didn't eavesdrop on our conversations with Coral using that stone she gave us at the start of the game, since later in the game she's shocked that nobody else even has the ability to use it. Gah, this makes no sense. So we return to Outset Island, and Coral realizes that time itself must be frozen, since the sun should have come up by now. This means that we can take as long as we want to visit our family after such a long absence, and nobody's going to catch up to us. Well, how is time frozen? Okay, so the world is cast in perpetual darkness and rain, but that's quite a far cry from time itself being frozen. If time was frozen, then that means that everyone should likewise be frozen in time. Time isn't passing. Any movement anyone takes would have infinite velocity, which in turn means it would have infinite force behind it. But that's clearly not what's happening. I'm pretty sure those pirates are just gonna set out as soon as 12 hours passes for them, regardless of whether there's any sunshine or not. Is time only frozen everywhere except in close proximity to us? Is that the reason why we're able to interact with our old friends and family? Time is truly frozen on every other island except this one? If time is only unfrozen for places that are in close proximity to Jabun's rock wall, then how were we able to sail to Outset Island without being frozen in time ourselves? The only way this makes any sense at all is if we accept that time is only unfrozen for locations that are in close proximity to Link and Coral, not Jaboon, and that raises just as many questions as it answers. So anyway, we break through to Jaboon's hiding spot and he gives us MacGuffin Pearl number 3 without us even having to do a dungeon first. Nice! We're finally ready to place the pearls in their pedestals, and that unlocks the Tower of the Gods. This dungeon will not only provide us with new equipment that we'll need in order to complete it, like the bow, but it will also require the use of various tools we collected on our travels, including the grappling hook, the Deku Leaf, and the boomerang, which aren't provided by this tower. This begs the question of how challengers were expected to complete this dungeon if they hadn't already acquired these tools beforehand. Gee, it sure is a good thing that giant crab was pinching away at Valu's tail and that Valu was too fucking stupid to just pull his tail out of the damn hole. Otherwise, we would never have gotten that grappling hook. And then we really would have been fucked. So Valu's own stupidity ends up saving our asses. We also learn our second Wind Waker song. Up until this point, the Wind Waker had only been used to change the direction of the wind. But now we learn our second Wind Waker song, and it really highlights the other really big problem in this game. The first one being how boring the sailing mechanic is. The Wind Waker is a pain in the ass. You have to painstakingly play every note of this damn song every itty-bitty time you want to perform its function. Every single time. When you're just changing the wind direction in between dungeon crawls, this isn't nearly as much of a problem, as our usage of the Wind Waker is sufficiently few and far between that it's only a minor annoyance. But beginning with this dungeon, we have to pull out this damn baton every 30 seconds, it seems. This would be so much less annoying if we simply had the option to instantly replay our most recent melody. But no, we have to replay each note of each melody one note at a time, and it's goddamn infuriating. Considering that the entire game is named after this item, you would expect it to be the most well-developed mechanic in the entire game, and yet it is arguably even worse than the sailing. The sailing is boring, but the Wind Waker is a pain in the ass, and I'll pick boring over hair-rippingly frustrating any day of the week. Just to put this in perspective for you, in 2012, a guy named Matthew Matosis published his own 41-minute review of this game, where he actually calculated all the time that was wasted by the Wind Waker. He found out that you use the Wind Waker a total of approximately 200 times over the course of the game, and that's only the times you actually have to use it. Altogether, he estimates that the total use of the Wind Waker, assuming you do all the button presses perfectly the first time and never have to go back and redo them, adds to a total of 50 minutes of wasted time. 50 minutes! Bear in mind that, according to the game's marketing, an NA% run of this game that doesn't involve sequence breaks or other speedrunning tactics would take an estimated 10 hours of gameplay for those who already know exactly what they're doing. Of those 600 minutes, a minimum of 50 of them are just spent using the Wind Waker for trivial tasks. Think about what they could have done with those 50 minutes that would have been an infinitely more productive use of the game's runtime. They could have added in a whole new dungeon. They could have given us more character development for the side characters. They could have given Ganon some screen time where he could give us a tangible demonstration of his evil instead of just being told that he's evil by the game's narrator and some other equally biased witnesses. So we complete the Tower of the Gods and are bequeathed the Master Sword, the Blade of Evil's Bane. Coral tells us that this is the only blade that can defeat Ganon because it is imbued with the power to repel evil. That's not merely a description of the Master Sword's energy, that is actually the official name of the energy that flows through this blade. First of all, could that name be any more uncreative if they literally tried? That would be like calling kinetic energy the power to make things go, or calling sound the thing that happens when things move and your ears pick it up. Second, is this the reason we all know that Ganon is evil, even though he hasn't actually done anything tangible? Because evil in this universe is actually a tangible force that can be objectively identified and measured right alongside magnetic energy. Is there a unit of measurement for how much evil is inside Ganon, or is it just measured in joules like all other energy? Because apparently it is objective enough and quantifiable enough that we can actually create a sword imbued with counter energy, which apparently would counter the evil energy in Ganon in a sort of acid-base relationship. And even if we accept all of that, the fact that Ganon is evil, not because of the choices he makes, but because of some contaminant he has in his body, that raises so many questions about the morality of killing him. Does Ganon even have the free will to choose to be good? Or is the evil power inside him forcing him to be evil like a puppet on a string? He turns into a puppet during one phase of the final boss fight. Perhaps that's meant to be symbolic, kind of like Taboo in the Super Smash Bros. Brawl controlling Master Hand. If the game were a bit more clever with its story and presented this moral ambiguity with even a shred of self-awareness, I might have enjoyed the game a lot more. But the game gives us no indication that the theories I'm postulating are anything more than that. Mere fan theories. If there is no indication that this was the developer's intention, then it's not canon, and that's simply all there is to it. Contrast that with games like Fallout 4 or Dragon Age, which are absolutely self-aware of their own moral ambiguity and weave that into their stories. I'm not cynical enough to think that Nintendo would have actively avoided such an interesting storytelling opportunity if they had only thought to use it. But perhaps it's even more depressing to assume that they had written such a golden opportunity for themselves without even realizing they had it, despite the fact that this plot thread was practically dancing naked in front of them. They apparently seem to think that adding in a few moments of token epicness is a substitute for genuine internal character drama, cleverly woven and carefully considered plot threads, and most importantly of all, character development. Spoiler warning, it's not a substitute for any of those things. So when we head back to the Forsaken Fortress, we rescue Errol, and shock of shocks, Tetra's pirates even offer to return Errol home safely free of charge, even though they plan to charge a big-ass fee for all the other girls' safe return. I never understood that arbitrary generosity. If the fact that she's really Zelda deep down inside is what's causing her to be so generous with Link, why isn't it also causing her to be so generous with all the other families? Of course, even though our sister is now safe, we still need to take revenge against Ganon for kidnapping her in the first place. Oh yeah, because being consumed with a lust for revenge isn't an evil thing to do at all. I'm sorry, but who's the evil one here? When we make it up to Ganon, he actually explains to us that the only reason we got this far is because he allowed us to get this far. He wanted us to pull the Master Sword from its pedestal because, by doing so, the seal on his power had been broken. Okay, first of all, why the hell didn't the King of Red Lions warn us about that? Isn't that kind of an important thing to fill me in on before I go and risk my life trying to slay him? surely he knew about that little function that the Master Sword had served. Second, how did he escape from his prison in order to begin the events of this game? If it wasn't because he found a way around the Master Sword's seal, then how exactly did he do it? We never get even so much as a throwaway line explaining that little plot hole. So because our attempts at cold-blooded revenge didn't go exactly according to plan, we retreat back to the Underwater Kingdom for a breather. Oh, the irony. And get a full briefing on the backstory that was told in abridged format at the beginning of the game. It turns out that, sometime after the events of Ocarina of Time, Ganon had escaped from his evil realm to which he had been banished, but because Link had been sent back in time so the events of Majora's Mask could take place, that means we needed another Link to step up and fight Ganon, but apparently nobody was able to prove themselves worthy. So when the people prayed to the gods for salvation, the gods apparently looked at all those who failed to prove themselves worthy of the Master Sword and just decided, well, you guys all suck, so we'll just kill all humanity with a big-ass flood. You know, I think Ganon might be onto something when he said that our gods had forsaken us. So in order to defeat Ganon, we have to find the 2 temples and repair them so as to restore the power to repel evil, oh god, that is such a stupid name, to the Master Sword. The 2 temples are marked on our map, but one is blocked by a Mount Rushmore wannabe, and the other is a big fat blowhard. At this point, you are out of hints. The game gives you 0 indication of what you're supposed to do to get inside, and fuck me if Coral provides any damn help. So, in 2003, when this game first came out, there was only one place to go if you got stuck on a game. So, get out your nostalgia goggles, everybody! Game facts! Do your magic! Oh my god! The solution to this progression gate is so goddamn cryptic that I'd imagine the developers were giggling like horny schoolgirls when they set it up. So whenever we were sailing around, there was this tornado that we would sometimes come across. If we got trapped in it, we would get blown to a random spot on the map, maybe putting us closer to our goal, but 99% of the time, just putting us farther away. So obviously you want to avoid this tornado since it's essentially the equivalent of a bottomless pit in a dungeon as far as gameplay is concerned, right? Wrong! Turns out, now, and only now, are you supposed to just sail headfirst into this damn thing, even though the game gives you absolutely fuck all indication that this is what you're supposed to do. So you get caught in the tornado's winds, and then you take out your bow and shoot the frog guy who taught you the song to change the wind direction. Way to repay this guy for giving you such a valuable power. I'd expect he'd want to kill you now, not just send you flying to a random spot on the map. But nope, turns out he actually likes it when people try to kill him. So he gives you an upgrade to the Wind's Requiem. With this new song called The Ballad of Gales, we can actually zip around the game map instantaneously, rather than just change the direction of the wind so you can sail wherever you want. Well, this is certainly a useful spell. Would have been hella nice if you had given me this power from the get-go, but better late than never. Only one problem though, it doesn't enable me to get inside these temples. So, game facts, do your magic. Well, as it turns out, this is just step 1 of what you're supposed to do. Now that you have the Ballad of Gales, you're supposed to fast travel to this specific spot right here, into a place you can't access without warping. From there, you are given the fire and ice arrows by some fairies. Apparently they haven't had visitors in so long that they're willing to give away priceless treasures just because you paid them a visit. Pfft, losers. Oh, but if you think that's all we needed to do to get into the temples, think again. Now that we have the fire and ice arrows, we're supposed to travel to these two locations in the middle of bumfuck nowhere and use the opposite elemental arrows to make them safe to traverse. By going through these mini dungeons, we are able to acquire the power bracelets so we can lift the stone head up, and the iron boots so we can walk against the powerful winds. Then and only then are we able to enter the respective temples so we can do the dungeons. Were the game developers laughing their asses off when they set that up? This entire section is one great big troll of game design. It would have been significantly less painful if they had just given you some kind of in-game clue, but nope, you're just stranded in the middle of the ocean and are expected to just know what to do. If I were forced to say one good thing about this sequence, it would be that the iron boots and power bracelets are certainly a step above the iron boots in Ocarina of Time. On the original N64 version of Ocarina of Time, the iron boots could only be equipped from the inventory menu, meaning that you had to pause the game and navigate through an annoying menu in order to equip them. This was the main reason why the water temple in that game is so infamous, because you were doing that extremely tedious task approximately once every 10 seconds. As Matthew Matosis points out in his review of that game, it would have been significantly less of a pain in the ass if the iron boots could just be mapped to one of the C buttons, allowing you to equip and unequip the boots instantly with the press of a single button. Well, in Wind Waker, they have changed the iron boots so that you can indeed map them to the X, Y, or Z buttons, so you can equip and unequip them instantly. The power bracelets, meanwhile, are just always on, since there's no reason not to have them on once you get them, since unlike the iron boots, they don't impede you in any way when equipped. So at the very least, I will give Wind Waker that much of a thumbs up. However, if the highest compliment I can pay this segment is that it doesn't have one of the most widely criticized mechanics of an earlier game in the franchise, that's not exactly high praise. Speaking of Ocarina of Time's water temple, I seriously get that sort of vibe from the earth and wind temples in this game once I finally managed to get to playing them. Not because I can't equip the iron boots fast enough, but because the Wind Waker is infuriating in these dungeons. You have to take a companion with you in each of these dungeons. Medley of Dragon Roost Island is the Sage of the Earth Temple, and Makar from Forest Haven is the Sage of the Wind Temple. First of all, the temples seem to have their names switched around. The Wind Temple seems to have more of an earth and forest motif to it, while the Earth Temple seems to be more flying-centric and sky-based. I don't know, maybe that was just a communication error between the various development teams, I don't know, but it is annoying. But trust me, that's the least of these temples' worries. Remember earlier when I said that the Wind Waker was a pain in the ass? Well, this is where it's at its most pain in the ass-ness. Just like with the iron boots in Ocarina of Time's Water Temple, the number of times in both of these dungeons when you have to do the command melody one fucking note at a time is enough to make you rip your hair out. Hey, here's a suggestion for ya. On the D-pad, you press up to summon your C-chart and press down to get rid of the C-chart and go back to actually playing the game. Couldn't up on the D-pad have just performed both functions, and down on the D-pad could be used to switch back and forth between controlling Link and his companion with the press of a single button? So, anyway, we do these two dungeons, and each time the Master Sword gets more powerful. When we do the second dungeon, the Master Sword is once again at full strength. So now we can go and confront Ganon for a final showdown, right? Nope. There's one more thing we need to do, and let me tell you, this is where the game goes from annoying to absolutely irredeemable. Coral explains to us that simply powering up the Master Sword alone won't be enough. He tells us that we also have to find the 8 broken shards of the Triforce of Courage. Okay, first of all, why didn't you tell me this the first time, you jackass? When we returned to the Forsaken Fortress, you very clearly told me that me having the Master Sword was all I needed to be able to defeat Ganon. Even if I give you a pass for not realizing that the power to repel evil was gone from the Master Sword, you very clearly stated that the fully powered Master Sword was all I needed to defeat Ganon. Now all of a sudden it's not enough? Aside from the blah blah power being gone, which has been corrected now, what exactly has changed? Second, even Coral doesn't know where the Triforce shards are located. All he knows is that they're somewhere in the Great Sea. So, am I supposed to just run around the Great Sea, zigzagging around and checking every single square inch of the Great Sea, hoping I eventually come across the Triforce shards like they're 8 needles in an ocean-sized haystack? No! Just fucking no, I'm not fucking doing that. GameFAQs, do your magic! Oh my fucking Lord Jesus Christ Almighty. You have got to be kidding me. Okay, so remember when I said that there was something else at Windfall Island you had to do in order to complete the game? Turns out there's this guy named Tingle, who is currently serving time in the Windfall Island jail for some unknown crime. You need him to actually tell you where to find the Triforce charts, maps written in the ancient Hylian language that Velu speaks that, once translated, can tell you where the Triforce shards are buried. So in order for him to tell you where the 8 different Triforce charts are located, you have to break him out of his cell so he can escape to freedom. What? You gotta be kidding me! First of all, the game gives you absolutely fuck all indication that you're supposed to do this. In fact, the game actively discourages you from straying off the beaten path when you go to get your sale. So how was I supposed to know that this was necessary to complete the game? Second, even if I took some time to explore Windfall Island over Coral's advice to the contrary, why would I want to free Tingle? He's obviously in jail for a reason, and yet Link is supposed to press the button to open Tingle's cage without questioning for even a minute what Tingle actually did to land himself in that cell. Maybe Link just doesn't believe in incarceration, at which point I have to renew my earlier question of just who exactly is the evil person here. You must literally aid and abet in a literal prison escape in order to complete the game. How the fuck is Link the good guy here? But even after you do that, finding the Triforce charts is only step 1. You still have to get them translated. Tingle is the only character in the game who can translate them, and he charges a king's ransom for each one. Why can't the King of Red Lions translate them for me? We see after the Forsaken Fortress that he understands Hylian, so why can't he just tell us what these damn charts say? Oh, and we also have to hand over some joy pendants to another random, seemingly inconsequential woman on Windfall Island so that she'll hand over... Oh my god, am I really about to say this? The deed to her entire fucking house. Because one of the Triforce charts we need is located inside that house. Of course, all we need to complete the game is temporary access to the house, but instead, we actually own the house now. It's not a plot hole in this game, although it is a completely unnecessary line of dialogue, but it does create a bit of a plot hole in the two games that are sequels to this game, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. Those games are direct sequels to this game and feature the same Link as the protagonist. However, at the beginning of Phantom Hourglass, we see Link is now sailing the seas with Tetra's pirate crew. Why would he be doing that if he has a home to live in? And remember, this is necessary to get the Triforce chart, so it most definitely happens in lore. It's not like Phantom Hourglass is just assuming that the player didn't get the house during Wind Waker, in much the same way that the enemies in Twilight Princess are assuming that the player hasn't yet learned the optional combat moves. You have to do this in order to complete the game. So that is absolutely a historical event as of the events of Phantom Hourglass. So anyway, once we finally have all 8 Triforce charts and get them translated, then it's back to zigzagging around the great empty sea to actually pull the Triforce shards out of the ocean. Now, in this game's very limited defense, I think that what the developers were going for here is that it's supposed to be an homage to the original Legend of Zelda on the NES, where the Triforce of Courage was also split into 8 pieces, and where you didn't know at the beginning where exactly they were. You had to actually go and find them. However, this arc in this game is so far removed from the original game in all but the most superficial of similarities that it actually feels more like a parody of that game rather than an homage to it. It's almost like the developers of this game had read complaints online about how that game hasn't aged very well, and they were like, "Oh, you think that game was annoying? Oh, we'll show you how annoying it could have been, you self-entitled pricks." First of all, that game only has 128 sectors in it, with 8 rows and 16 columns. Each sector could be traversed in about 5 seconds, so it was a huge world for its time, but it was actually very easy to comb every inch of it if you put more than 10 minutes a week into the game. In Wind Waker, it takes about as much time to sail from Windfall Island to Dragon Roost Island as it does to walk from the easternmost side of the original game map to the westernmost side. So actually combing every inch of this game's map is a much taller of an order. Second, there was actually stuff to do in the original game besides finding the dungeons. Every single sector in that game had, at the very least, some enemies to fight. You were not deprived of action for any more than a few seconds if you kept going. In Wind Waker, this enormous game map is mostly empty, as I already complained about. Simply making it to your next destination is long, drawn out, and boring. Wind Waker appears to have about as much going on in its overworld as the original NES game did, despite it having an overworld about 100 times as big. Third, in the original game, exploring the overworld and finding the different dungeons was literally the whole point of that game. It didn't start out with a linear sequence of dungeons only to bait and switch you at the 75% point with a completely different premise. Wind Waker's Triforce Shard Hunt is completely shoehorned into the game. Fourth, with the exception of the 8th and 9th dungeons in that game, the entrances to the other dungeons had entire sectors to themselves, so it was pretty impossible to stumble upon the entrance to the dungeons 1 through 7 without immediately recognizing that you had the entrance to a dungeon. In Wind Waker, they're just found in the middle of bumfuck nowhere with no context, no monsters guarding them, no rhyme or reason for their placement, and most importantly of all, no markers to tell you where they are. Hell, even the original pearls had some rhyme or reason for where they were. As Matthew Matosis points out in his review of the game, the islands where the pearls are originally located, Jaboon's quick escape notwithstanding, and the pedestals where you're supposed to place the pearls to unlock the Tower of the Gods, actually create the shape of the Triforce if you draw lines between them. The game never actually mentions this connection, but it's certainly an interesting Easter egg once you have it pointed out to you. But the Triforce shards? which would actually be thematically appropriate to have them laid out in such a pattern, seem to just be placed wherever. It's as if one of the developers just hung a giant map of the Great Sea on his wall, blindfolded himself, threw 8 different darts at the map, and wherever they landed is where the Triforce shards were gonna be hidden. Couldn't the Triforce shards have been hidden away inside some dungeons? Lord knows there's enough empty space in the Great Sea for you to fit a few of them in there. If you wanted to prevent Link from getting into the dungeons before this section of the game, you could have simply had the entrances to the dungeons be protected by a force field that can only be broken by a fully powered Master Sword. We have a force field like that blocking the path to the final dungeon of the game, so it's not like it would have been all that out of place. And it would have done wonders to break up the monotony of this extremely boring segment of the main game. Now, Matthew Matosis postulates a theory where a lot of this not fun stuff, especially in the second half of the game, was done due to developmental problems. They had a deadline rapidly approaching, and they didn't have time to make handcrafted content for the second half of the game that rivaled the content in the first half. And so they had to slap together a lot of content at the last minute, and this Triforce Shard Hunt is the most definitive proof of that. Now, if I were just judging this game in a vacuum, I might be inclined to agree with Matosis' theory on this. However, there is one teeny tiny detail you may have missed about this game that leads me to believe that probably isn't the case. It was made by Nintendo, you dumbass! While there are plenty of game publishers who I would fully expect to force games to be published by a specific deadline, whether they were ready or not, Nintendo is not one of them. As Shigeru Miyamoto himself once famously said, a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. Furthermore, remember that Nintendo first rose to prominence in the home console market because they saw a void they could fill in North America after the North American video game crash of 1983, which was caused in no small part due to this exact problem, games being rushed to market before they were finished. Surely Nintendo remembers what brought them to the dance? Surely Nintendo, of all people, wouldn't forget the lessons taught by their own history. Put simply, if Nintendo truly cared about the quality of their games, and I'd expect they do care tremendously, especially when it comes to Mario, Zelda, and Metroid, the big 3 Nintendo franchises, I doubt anyone at Nintendo's publishing section would have objected to granting the developers more time to make this game so that it could be made properly. But okay, let's assume that this urban legend is true, that the game really was rushed to store shelves, and that the developers had to scramble to add some last-minute content to the game to compensate. Even if we accept that, I still have to dock points from this game. The mere fact that a game's lack of quality is caused by developmental problems preventing the developers from actually realizing their vision for the game does not cause the game to no longer lack quality. As I mentioned in my video comparing and contrasting Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario, I see no merit in reviewing a game based on what it was originally intended to be because we will never get to experience that. Reviewing a game based primarily on developer vision is speculative, conjectural, and most importantly of all, egregiously unfair to other games that got closer to their developer's vision, as doing so implies that all the time, effort, and skill that went into those more closely realized games ultimately was unnecessary. So I'm sorry, but whatever the behind-the-scenes reasons might have been, the simple bottom line is you cannot release a game that is not finished. Doing so is a recipe for disaster, and that's simply all there is to it. So now that we collected the shards of the Triforce, we are now finally ready to launch a final assault on Ganon. Finally! We now enter the final dungeon of the game, but if you think this game is finished with the infuriating crap, you've got another thing coming. You know what's more annoying than recycling mechanics from a previous game of the franchise? How about recycling content from earlier in this very game? Yeah, this final dungeon literally just has you fighting 4 of the previous bosses you faced earlier in this game. 5 if you count the Dark Knight mid-boss from the Forsaken Fortress, in identical circumstances that you fought them the first time. And when I say identical circumstances, I mean they literally go as far as to restrict you to the inventory items you had when you first fought them. Think about that for a second. They didn't just copy and paste the bosses. At the very least, the part where your arsenal was restricted had to be programmed in manually. In other words, this wasn't mere lazy game design. They actually made a conscious choice and went out of their way to give us repeat content. Fuck you. Then we have the final boss fight itself. King Hyrule gets to the Triforce first and is able to make a wish. Instead of wishing for Ganon to simply disappear forever or something smart like that, he instead wishes for the old kingdom of Hyrule to forever be sealed away underwater. Why? As long as Ganon is still alive, he can still conquer and rule the Great Sea, right? Or at least that's what you'd like me to believe, even though he never actually does anything besides just being evil. You're an idiot. So, now that I have ripped this game to shreds, from literally the opening sequence to the final boss fight, some of you might reasonably ask, is there anything about this game that I actually like? Not just a part of this game that's not painful enough to be worthy of mention here, but something that I actually genuinely enjoy. Well, yes, there is one thing. The soundtrack. All throughout the game, I almost never got bored with the music in this game. Almost. The Great Sea music is nice and bombastic. The battle music is upbeat and gets you pumped. The respective dungeon themes are appropriately creepy. And the boss fight music combines with the bombastic nature of the Great Sea theme with the sense of danger from the dungeon music. Best of all, every section of this game sounds different. Each dungeon has its own background music. Each boss has its own background music. Each civilization has its own background music. The only background music that gets old after a while, through sheer overuse, is the Great Sea theme, because you hear it nearly every time you set sail. Perhaps the combat music for regular enemies is just as repetitive as the Great Sea theme, but at least when that music comes up, I'm primarily focused on dispatching the enemies in front of me, whereas when I'm on the Great Sea, there's very little for me to do except soak in the music. Unfortunately, if the best part about this game is just its soundtrack, then that's kind of sad. That basically means I can get the exact same enjoyment out of this game just by buying the soundtrack on a CD. Then I can just listen to this beautiful music without having to be distracted by the boring-ass sailing, the cryptic second half of this game, or the plot that makes no sense. And with that, my retrospective analysis of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker comes to a close. Put in the simplest terms, the story makes no sense, and there are a million plot holes that add up really quickly. Not the least of which is the fact that we have no real evidence that Ganon is evil aside from what all the biased NPCs tell us, which is a violation of one of the rules of writing. Show, don't tell. The sailing and the Wind Waker are both boring and infuriating to use, which is especially egregious when you realize that these are the two mechanics that received the most attention in both the game's title and box art, as well as the pre-release marketing, meaning that these are the two mechanics that need to be fully fleshed out more than any other mechanic. The second half of this game is when the quality of the game just gets locked into a death spiral. The second half of this game is cryptic beyond words, and in fact requires you to complete tasks that the game actively discourages you from doing. It would be bad enough if the game just expected you to know what to do with no hints, but the game actually tells you do not do X, knowing full well that you must do X in order to complete the game. I understand that this game has a huge fan base, but you can definitively count me as not being one of them. You are all free to enjoy what you enjoy, but I will not hold back my opinion about a game just because the vast majority of people enjoy it. And that will do it for today's video. Thanks for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, even if you disagree with my opinion, be sure to like this video and share it with your friends. Also, don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analysis and discussion of your favorite video games. In the meantime, however, I am Acerthorn, and I will see you guys later.